So thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Veda King Blanchard, and today I'm going to be interviewing Tina Capricorn, who is an amazing author that I'm really grateful to know. And thank you so much, Tina, for joining us for the book festival.
Oh, thank you so much for asking me. I feel like as an author, I'm always trying to tell people about my work. So it's really nice to have someone ask me.
Well, I feel honored to have the gift of your time. And oh my God, that mug is amazing.
My Hedwig mug.
Yeah. Well, the owl makes me want to give a shout out to Warren Wilson, of which we're both alum. And I'm really grateful to that school for many reasons, one of which is meeting you. So
yeah, awesome. Likewise.
Yeah. So I'd love to share with our audience today a little bit about your motivation and your passion for writing.
Yeah, I feel like writing for me has always been a passion. I can remember very distinctly a Lisa Frank Trapper Keeper in my 4th grade that I wrote my first chapter book, handwritten. And it was about kind of a Cinderella story. And I remember also really wanting a main character that didn't have a gender. And so I called her she, he, and I'm in 4th grade. So that was the best I could do. But just thinking about that, and my mom says my first word was book. So I feel like writing has always been this passion. You know, at Warren Wilson, I was actually an art major, and I did painting and illustration. So art is my first love. But even as a kid, I would write stories and illustrate them. So now that I am doing, as an indie author, you know, part-time, I also, within my marketing and just for my world building and just for me, I love to do character portraiture and create this whole world. And so I think my passion for writing comes from a really overactive imagination and being like, well, what can I do with this daydream? And, you know, a book is a dream you hold in your hands. So I think for me, books are the best way for me to share my daydreams with people and the weird concepts that I think of. And, you know, I think that's also one of the reasons that my writing has such a juxtaposition of everything that I enjoy, which is science, mythology, you know, superhero stuff, magic, and just a deep and abiding love of story and like what stories do for us as like a culture and a society. It's important. You know, we've been telling stories for a really long time, and stories have been important to us as humans for a really long time. And so to get to do that, you know, as a passion of mine makes me feel like I'm part of this really large zeitgeist, you know, of other creatives who also have this need to tell a story and be creative and produce work that touches other people. And it's a gift. It feels like a gift. And I feel blessed and lucky every day that I get to write. And so, yeah, I think that's my major motivation is kind of this big scope of just feeling this creative energy, and books are the best way to translate that right now. But yeah, I also really enjoy it. It's cathartic. You know, I know a lot of writers too, when they're having tough times, writing can be really a touchstone. And that's true for me as well. Like, I think the Anchor Time, my first book, I think I started because I was sick of my roommates and I just holed myself up in my room and I wrote 30 pages and I was like, there's something within me, you know, this isn't just a hobby. And that was 6 years ago. In the first iteration, I think at that point, the name of the book was The Queen in the Dark or something like that. You know, books go through many iterations before they see publication. But yeah, so the motivation for me is just, I gotta utilize this creativity, and books are a great way to do that.
You know, listening to you brings to mind the Socratic definition of artist, which I really feel like you're meeting with your writing by fulfilling a need, and because that's really, like, an artist can be anything, can have any medium, can be a doctor, can be a philosopher by that definition. And it's really about perceiving a need, having the training to meet the need, and then finding a creative way where you get an agreement from your patient or your reader in this situation, that what you have created, the treatment plan, is going to fit that need. And you have readers coming to you and following you. I know you have a Patreon following as well as Instagram, and I love that. I love that you just talked about need. Like I really just fits that definition in my mind, and it really speaks to, writing is an art, if we address it that way. If we're not just following a formula that is churning out a story that maybe is fun, right? Because writing can be fun without fulfilling a need, and maybe that fulfills its own need.
Yeah, it's definitely a need.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's really amazing. That you yeah. I think that every person who can show up as an artist in whatever field or medium they're practicing in enriches this organism that we're all a part of.
Absolutely.
And the stories that we tell or that we expose ourselves to really help shape our frame of reference, our thought process, and thereby our whole experience. And so having that, I mean, as a mindfulness teacher, it's really appealing to me to have that consciousness when you're creating something. So you really made my heart sing there. Yeah. Yeah, and I love following that passion. And just so that our viewers know, I'm looking down because I've got some notes in front of me that I'm trying to keep myself in line with.
One thing I love that you mentioned too is that it is an art form, and I do refer to it as art. And I don't know if a lot of my contemporaries or peers necessarily do that, but it definitely is art. Anything that you produce that is creative, that was once not there, that your imagination made, is art. And I think so. There's so many, as a person with an artistic background, there's so many parallels for me in creating a painting versus creating a book. You do your outline first in a drawing. Same thing with a book. You don't put your finishing shadow work and light work until it's absolutely done. Same with the book. You want to put your finishing touches on last. You can't finish, without having a basis. And I think it's really important to recognize that writing and story form, and whatever way we tell stories, whether it's written word, text image, animation, it is art, and it's vital. It's vital to us as a society. I think it humanizes us in a way that elevates us from those baser things. We're climbing up Maslow's hierarchy here. The full realization of our potential could be art. I would argue it's also science, but it's definitely not greed, which I think aligns with more of our baser instincts and compels a lot of indie authors to churn out books because we have such a binge culture. But art isn't necessarily well suited to a binge culture, because good art takes time.
Yeah. I want to just clarify for anyone who doesn't know that Maslow's hierarchy of needs speaks to it's like a pyramid, kind of like the food pyramid. And at this base level is like our physiological needs. So like food, shelter, and then we get to psychological needs, feelings of safety, security. And then on the top is spiritual. Well, at the next level, there's some spiritual needs. And then there's this whole organism, right? So when we're feeding all of these lower needs, which doesn't make them
less at all. They're vital.
Right.
They're also vital. You can't have art without food. You can't have art without food.
Right. So and then we get to really go into our humanity. And I think that I love thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs because it really, really paints a picture of how if our basic needs aren't met, if we're not feeling safe and secure, then it's really challenging for us to think at the higher levels and to really see the larger picture. I also, I really love, I think that what you just shared about embracing our humanity also brought back what you shared earlier about your first story having somebody who was non-binary, even though you didn't really have the language for it yet. Yeah. And I think that is a great story to share again about increasing our human consciousness and our humanity, and our acceptance of the uniqueness of each of us, right? Because it's really our uniqueness that makes the one organism that we're a part of beautiful, right? If we're not all sitting in our uniqueness, then we can't create as beautiful a thing, because not all of the facets shine with the same kind of light. So I love that that was your first exploration. Like, go baby Tina. Well done. Well done.
In a Lisa Frank Trapper Keeper with unicorns. Just to clarify. Yeah. In line, wide ruled line notebook paper, and there were illustrations. I wish I could find it. I would totally scan it and share it on my website.
That's great.
But yeah.
Yeah. So I know that science feeds a lot of your work right now. You're working often in that realm, and you've been sharing on Instagram some great posts about some things that you have studied and are revisiting right now. And I'd love to share with everybody something about that.
Sure. I think one of the things that fascinates me most about science is that, just our cell phones, if you went back 200 years, someone would call this magic. And so the line between science and magic, at least for our human perception, what we have to work with, is very thin. And I think that line really fascinates me. And it definitely translates into my book. And one thing that's always fascinated me are black holes. I think they're just the weirdest, coolest, strangest things in the universe that we know of so far. And it's actually, Interstellar obviously did a great job of using black holes and time dilation as a plot point. And I was still writing The Anchor of Time at the time. And I was like, yes, this is what I want. I want to take really kind of mind-bending, strenuous scientific concepts and shrink them down and make them into a plot device. And so in The Anchor of Time, I do have a black hole that is a plot device. But I'm also like, black hole is just not a great term for it. It's very obvious that's what it is. It's this void of nothing. But at its center, is the singularity, like literally a black hole. And I have this post on my Instagram, but a black hole is really made of two parts. It's made of the event horizon and the singularity. And the event horizon is kind of this sphere that's around the void. And the singularity is basically everything coming together that the event horizon is sucked in. So light can't escape. And that's how much the gravity is so strong that even light can't escape its grasp, which you think about light, it's this ineffable thing that we just have around us. Like, can you imagine a force so strong that even sucks in light? Like that itself, like that's novel, But in The Anchor of Time, I'm like, first of all, we wouldn't call them black holes. Let's call them as their function. And so in The Anchor of Time, black holes are referred to as the breaking of the light. I also think I love wordplay. I'm a word nerd for sure. And I just like that term. And I'm like, in my upcoming novel, Shadow Glass too, it kind of is in like the vernacular that we use, our scientists use, aren't necessarily what my characters would use. And so it's also really fun to take these scientific concepts and kind of turn them into a mythology or a legend or some kind of other concept that, you know, isn't science-based, you know, because before all of our science was proven, our hypotheses were proven, they were just, you know, daydreams, you know. And so I think the reason that science is so interesting to me, it's because it's the way we've defined our reality too, and how we've, like, you know, just like, if you just sit down and think about the concept of time, it's super strange. You know what I mean? And if you go back to the very beginning of what we define as the beginning of time, there's even a little time before that called Planck's epoch, which I haven't even studied yet or put on Instagram yet. But the idea of like how time was different right after the Big Bang, you know, like, and who knows how long that was. I'm sure there's a wiki article that says how long it is. But just the concepts, those kind of concepts, like, just really fire my imagination, and it makes me want to build a story around them, because I just think they're so amazing. Like, even time dilation around an event horizon of a black hole, it's so fascinating to me, because you know, you can't escape an event horizon. You will get sucked in. If light gets sucked in, you and I are going to get sucked in. But let's just say that you and I could drive a little spacecraft around just the rim and then fly back to Earth. We would go back to Earth, and let's say we flew around for a week. We could go back to Earth and thousands of years could have passed. And that's because at the event horizon of a black hole, space-time warps in really strange ways, but because of gravity, it slows time. And so it seems very brief to our perception, but in other places where there's less gravity, time moves completely differently. And that actually happens to our astronauts on the International Space Station to a much less degree. But they do experience time dilation and velocity dilation, because they're also not going the same speed as the Earth, because we're also on this rock going pretty fast. We can't feel it. Our perception can't notice it. But those are the two things that create reality as we know it. And so just all that kind of stuff really just inspires me and makes me want to write stories about it and involve it in some way in my stories, because I just think it's fascinating. And also the idea that, could I have a being of some sort that interacts with that power or has that power, and what would that do to that being if they were trying to relate to humans on Earth, you know? And we have lots of big omnipotent characters like that throughout stories. You know, in The Watchmen, I think of Dr. Manhattan. In Marvel, I think of Vision or Ultron, take your pick. Mm-hmm. But we always have had, those are contemporary, but we've always had stories with these, like, you know, the chosen one or whatever. And it's, how does this person with great power interact with those who don't? And that's really can also be a morality play too, because with great power comes great responsibility, even if it's the ability to manipulate time.
Maybe especially.
Yeah, especially manipulate time. So just that kind of stuff. And one of the other things that really fascinates me too is just early Earth, like our planet, you know, let's bring it back out from space and back home a little more. Is I did a post on Snowball Earth, which is a very theoretical, but there's a lot of evidence of it by geologists, and geologists could talk about it much better than I could. But Snowball Earth is the idea that in the Cryptogenian period, which is before the Cambrian explosion, so this is like 700 million years ago. This is a long time ago. Mm-hmm. It's theorized that the Earth was covered in ice. The sea, we had a supercontinent back then. We didn't have the continents that we had now. It was one big, massive. And that was covered in a mile thick portion of ice, like all ice. And the sea was either completely covered in ice or was just slushy with ice. Geologists don't quite agree on that. But anyway, from space, Earth would have looked like a giant snowball. So hence the term Snowball Earth. But this is like really early times when we didn't really even have the atmosphere that we know right now, because we didn't have trees creating oxygen. But because of these frozen periods followed by supermassive volcanoes, we had cold and then really hot. It like theoretically, if that is all, you know, if all of the evidence leads to that, it could have led to plate tectonics and continental shift. It could have led to multicellular organisms. And my idea, like that time period, I'm like, that is a fascinating, weird time of Earth. I'm like, what if there are magical creatures there, you know?
Yeah.
And they got to see humanity evolve from that point on. And what would they think of us? What would their opinion be of us? And that's a very interesting question as well, that I like to ponder about, and I pondered about for about 90,000 words in Shadow Glass. Because all of the mythological creatures or magical beings are pretty old and like talk about humans in terms of like, well, I remember when they were lizards, kind of like that, you know. Not quite lizards, but you know what I mean. So this like, and then again, the perception of time, you know, for those creatures, time is very different than for us, because we live such short lifespans. Our perspectives are different in terms of time. So, but yeah, I think science is so fascinating. And I also feel like I was never encouraged when I was younger to really pursue science. I was definitely not great at math. And so I also felt like science wasn't for me. And it's only in my adulthood that I've voluntarily read, you know, A Brief History of Time and Death by Black Hole by Neil deGrasse Tyson, and watched The Cosmos, Carl Sagan's and Neil's. Because I love to do that. Like, I'm the person that, you know, you're going to see me 8:00 at night. What are you reading? I'm reading about Planck's epoch after the Big Bang. Really cool. You know, that's my, you know, that just like, I don't know, something about it really gets my intellect going and makes me want to write stories. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think you spoke to this a little bit, but, you know, I love the idea that magic is just science that hasn't been discovered yet, right? It's just something that happens that we don't have an explanation for. And I think that gives us room, that perspective, to really look at science for what it is, because so much of it is hypotheses. And every time that, like, there's actually very little in science that we know as fact. Yeah. And so when we have like big discoveries, they can really change our whole world because of the information that they give us. And I think something that is pretty accessible to everyone, as an example of that, is the discovery that the Earth was round. You know, and I love the thing I think I love most about that perspective is the room that it makes for people, even if they are staunchly scientifically minded, to embrace the magic in life. Because if we turn our perspective to like really celebrate life as magical, then everything can kind of feed into that. And life can be this beautiful place where we're learning and we're having fun, and we're just enchanted by the beauty of the picture that culminates with all of our experiences.
Absolutely.
And I agree that stories can really feed into that and like just help us in this expansion, you know, take us on a ride that makes us consider things that you've already researched in detail, so your readers don't have to. and then just launch into a shift in perspective, you know? And again, to talk about, you know, I think art, whether, again, no matter the medium, right? Because even if we're talking about a doctor, a Western medicine doctor as an artist, if you have a shift in perspective about your health because of a relationship with a Western traditional doctor, then that can feel really magical, and things that we consider miraculous can happen because our physiology can have a huge jump in recovery that doesn't have a scientific explanation.
Absolutely. And the power of the mind, you know, if you really want to get into it, like the idea of perspective, and, you know, just even in our country, we've seen how different perspectives can clash, but we're all living in the same world. How are people getting such different perspectives? And it's, you know, it's how you view the world. It's how you take in information in the world that can feed that. And I also think that's one of the most magical things about books, is that we can all read the same book and you and I will have a different perspective based on what the author described the main character as looking like, because
Sure.
both of our minds are independent, you know, but also connected and at some baser level. You know what I mean? I definitely feel like, you know, looking at the earth as an entire organism, you know, we're vital and we're also very destructive. And so kind of looking at humanity under that lens, you know, it changes your perspective. But but going back to your magic conversation, I think because I've been writing like this, I have shifted into just calling everything that is super awesome. I'm like, well, that's just book magic. That's kitchen magic, you know, because if you view the world through that, I have found it, you're right, it's a lot more joyful. And even reading science, like my deep science stuff, I'm like, this stuff is crazy. This is just magic. This is some deep space magic, you know, because we are still guessing. We don't really know what goes on in a black hole. We're just extrapolating based on what we know of physics and what, you know, what we've discovered. But the reality is we don't know. We know that the laws of physics as we know it break down. In what ways? It could be full of unicorns and lollipops. We don't know.
Yeah, for
you
sure.
know, so I'm going to hold out a hope that there are space unicorns.
I mean, I think that's a very fun hope. Yeah, my heart can definitely attach to that. Like maybe someday I will get to ride a unicorn in space. That's really cool.
We don't know.
And I, you know, I think that perspective shift too, again, goes back to having our taxonomy of needs met, right? Like when we have that hierarchy of needs met, or if we don't have it met, right? If we don't feel safe and secure, then our mind is really functioning on a fear level, unless we're consciously interacting with it and pulling ourselves through the fear, right? Because if we squash it down, it's just going to be there and we're not going to be aware of it. It gets more dangerous.
Don't do that.
But if we're consciously interacting with it and moving through the fear, then we can have some success to kind of work on ourselves. But there are so many people who feel persecuted and don't feel safe and are scared that and that becomes their motivation, you know, because it's hard to do. Yeah, and it's hard to do reflection when you're in a state of fear. You know?
Absolutely.
Fear is tends to be one of those things that can just inherently fall in one of our blind spots, which means we literally can't see it. And we're often not available to other people showing it to us.
Yes. And that really kind of reminds me of my soon to be released Shadow Glass. It's set in Germany in 1944, a time when there was a lot of fear.
Sure.
And again, speaking of characters that have been around a long time, like for us, that time period is a really dark time period. It's a landmark in our history, especially for the people of Europe, especially for people of Germany. But again, perspective for some of those ancient creatures, they're like, this is just another in a long line of horrible things humans have done to each other. And again, perspective shift. And within that, you know, there are characters that have felt persecuted and on the run for centuries. And it's, you know, an interesting juxtaposition to have them in this time that's pretty fearful for humans, but they're like, we've been afraid for a long time. Y'all just don't quit. Because I was reading several years ago, it was by an investigative journalist. I forget the name of the book, I apologize, but he basically, he was a war journalist and he condensed all of written human history. And from his conclusion, he's like, and it weren't, and this was not consecutive time, by the way, but he said, of all the written history, we really only have about 35 years of peace in human history. Those aren't consecutive years. So thinking in terms of that, our perspective as humans, it's like, again, we are the ancestors of people that survived that. No wonder we still have held on to these really divisive, less understanding personality traits, you know what I mean? Like thinking about where we've all come from, it kind of gives you a sense of pause. And I always aspire that I want humans to become like Star Trek. We put all this stuff aside and we go off into the stars and discover stuff. I'm holding on to that hope. But yeah, in terms of fear, I think fear also limits art. I think it censors art, and we self-censor. And then we also have, larger entities like governments trying to censor art because of fear. And so it's very interesting, the effect of fear on our perspective and on art. And it's a great plot device. It's a great way to make your characters think in ways that you're like, if you were feeling safe, you probably wouldn't make this decision, but it makes for a great story. So I think it's important to realize and note the effect of fear and anxiety on people, and what that might compel them to do that they would not ordinarily do if they didn't feel threatened or unsafe. Because we all crave safety. We all crave safety and belonging. And that's another theme in Shadow Glass. These magical beings that have had to keep hidden also crave love and belonging. And I'm like, that is something we can all relate to and we all deserve, and it's, again, fear gets in the way of that for us on a relationship level and on other levels. So.
Yeah, so true. So you've started talking about Shadow Glass, and I know that that is actually soon to be launched. So do you have a date for that for Shadow Glass?
I do.
Okay.
I do, and I haven't released this to my newsletter subscribers or put on my website. So this is an exclusive for the book festival viewers today. Shadow Glass will be coming out November 22nd.
Oh.
It's going to be on Amazon, y'all. And if you want to get a big excerpt of it right now, it's available on my website, tinacapricorn.com. All you have to do is subscribe to my email and you will get an ebook download. It's an ebook only, but it will be a physical book in November. But yeah, I've been working on that for about a year. I kind of started writing it last February, thinking it was a novella. That was a sequel. I've got the Anchor of Time right here. I thought it was going to be a sequel to this gorgeous beauty.
Yeah.
Just a little short story just to get your interest going. And then all the characters blossomed. And when I gave it to beta readers in July, they were all like, this needs to be a book. So now I have the Anchor of Time and Shadow Glass, which are they're the same characters, but again, it's timey-wimey time travel. So Shadow Glass really is historical fantasy time travel, whereas Forgotten Queen series, which is what the Anchor of Time is in, is more of futuristic dystopia sci-fi. And the Anchor of Time sequel will be coming out in summer of 2022.
Okay.
But if you go on my website, sign up for my newsletter, I promise you will know all these things. We will not let you not know when my books come out. I'm telling you, I love to tell people about my work. It's so rare that people ask me, so I'm like, oh, hello. You want to ask me about my book?
Well, and I love like that reflection of artistic transformation, right? Because you are, again, like that really fits with the Socratic vision of art, because of artists, because you're working with your readership, and your readership said, well, we really need more of this.
That's always great.
Yeah, and having that like exploration of fear, like what a great time, because we do have so much tension and fear coming up in our really global culture right now. I mean, there is still so much war and fighting happening. There is civil unrest for like many reasons. There are lots of people being oppressed and all of this, there's people who are struggling financially and or with health, and all of this elicits fear in us. And and to have, like, one of the things I think that can be really beautiful about art is how it can offer you an emotional processing in a way that kind of opens up to allow you to see into that blind spot. Like sometimes I know for myself that sometimes I'll have so much emotion that I kind of need something to take the edge off before I can explore the emotion. And I like to keep present with the fact that emotions are inherently irrational. And so all emotions are valid. And the logical story that we build around the emotion can often start in a place where, like, we don't know all of the information. And so we create a story to try and understand what we're feeling because we want to rationalize it. But when I remind myself that emotions are irrational, it gives me more space to just give myself a hug and like allow myself to feel. And
just feel.
And I feel like, and I feel like books really can support that, So I think that the exploration of fear that you're talking about in Shadow Glass really invites readers to just take the edge off of the fear that they're feeling by kind of simulating it through the character's experience. And then invites people to, like, okay, you've taken the edge off, and now you can go, like, give yourself some self-care and then feel through the rest of it as you're ready to. And I think that's a beautiful gift to give to society. So well done, you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think reading is just as therapeutic as writing. My go-to therapeutic books are romance. I love a good romance. Not ashamed to say it. And I can be a romance reader and a sci-fi author. Those things can both be true. I'm saying this to younger Tina because I used to be afraid to admit that I read romance. And I have to say the romance community is a warm, wonderful, welcoming community of readers and writers. Great folks. But yeah, there is something to be said about, book magic can take you out of whatever headspace or traumatic space you might be in. And I think a really good book allows you to see yourself in the characters and see yourself in their struggle and relate to them, because we all want to be seen. We all want to have a feeling of validation and a sense of belonging. And if books can also help with that, then good on you, books, But I think that goes back to our need for stories, is it validates our human experience in some way. I think, thinking of story tropes and archetypes, those are just things that we've all clung on to, we all relate to. There's a reason that archetypes are archetypes. We all seem to gravitate towards that. Yeah, absolutely. I think that processing your emotions through art or through books is a great way to go about it. Therapy also helps. But yeah, absolutely. And that is a great gift. And I think, every time I read a book, especially now that I've published one, I'm like, every book, and this is for everyone at the book festival, every book is a miracle. Like just knowing what it takes to get one started and get one to the finish line. And then as an indie author, I'm also marketing and talking about it. They're miracles. Treat them like precious objects. They're miracles.
Yeah. So we've is there anything else that you really want our listeners to know about Shadow Glass?
Shadow Glass is my second novel. It is technically within the same universe as The Anchor of Time, but it's The Anchor of Time. I just want to hold it up again. It's in the same universe, but it's in a past timeline. It's in the past, basically. but we're going to have similar characters. So if you are in love with some characters from the Anchor of Time, like Lachlan, he's also present in Shadowglass. And it's going to give more perspective to that. But moving forward, I think the Shadowglass series is really going to deal with that backstory and that historical timeline. And Forgotten Queen series, which again, the Anchor of Time is book one of, is going to deal with more of that dystopian future. I can't wait to share it with y'all. I've fallen in love with all of the characters in the story. And, you know, I picked the setting because it's a time we're all pretty familiar with, and we're familiar with the fear and the darkness of that time.
Mm-hmm.
But I hope that you come away with a different view, not of that time, but of just our culture and how we are as humans, I guess, and the perspective of time. I don't know. I hope you fall in love with the characters like I have.
Yeah.
I feel like, yeah, I had a really good time writing it. So I hope people have a good time reading it. It's got a lot of world building. It's got a lot of references to ancient mythology, Norse mythology in particular, if you're into that. And it's also, and also there's, I really tried to do research into, because I wanted my characters to be out of legend, but I also wanted them to be very relatable.
Mm-hmm.
So, I have a gnome, because I think gnomes are hilarious, like a typical garden gnome, and his husband is a shadow elf who's this like crazy warrior that is also really into jewelry. So, and I love that juxtaposition, and so Gaspar and Elohim, and Gaspar is the gnome, and he actually has an anger problem. He can berserk and turn into this crazy warrior, and you don't want him to do that. So normally you just want Gaspar to be his normal, jovial, wine drinking self. And so just like they're who I fell in love with, and the rest of the family kind of built around them. And I think too, one thing that also influences my writing and Shadowglass in particular is the sense of belonging. I'm a stepmom, and it can be challenging sometimes, and it can be challenging to feel like you are part of the family, I guess is for the best way to say it. And so I think that need for love and belonging really got put on the page with this found family with Gaspar and Elohim and everyone else who you'll meet when you read it. And so I really fell in love with the whole family in this book, and I hope that you will too. So
that's very cool.
Yeah.
And then you have mentioned Anchor of Time, and I'd love to just share a little bit more about Anchor of Time with her. Yeah. So go ahead.
Oh, you want me to talk about it?
Yeah.
I would love to. So this was my first book. I just came out with the second edition. It's gorgeous. It's got an updated cover, or a back blurb too. Really easy ways to get to my website. And it has a bonus chapter in the back for book 2, Lightbreaker, which is coming out in the summer, which I love. I love little teaser chapters. And it's just been reformatted, so it's a little easier to read. But The Anchor of Time is a story about this hairstylist that falls through her mirror at work. And I used to do hair. So, this took me 6 years to write. So clearly I inserted myself a little bit in the story. But also mirrors are weird. I don't know if anyone ever sits and contemplates mirrors. Like, I like to contemplate mirrors as alternate dimensions. So I went with that. And as a stylist, I've worked in front of a mirror for a really long time. And so I'm like, thinking about mirrors and alternate dimensions. So Renata, our main character, falls through a mirror into a different dimension, and shenanigans ensue. And it's a very timey-wimey, slow-burning love story, because she doesn't remember this person that is in this other dimension, and they don't remember her, but they're connected in a very binding way. A la, what's the greatest power in the universe? One could argue gravity. I argue it's love. I argue it's love. Maybe love and gravity are the same. That's the next book. But it's ultimately a very time travel love story. So while that is all happening, though, while Renata is in this other dimension, in the future, her son and granddaughter are searching for her, on board the spaceship Lupus Obsidian, which is a lot like a TARDIS. It can travel through time. It can pierce the dimensional veil, is how I put it. And they have a quantum gate, and they're trying to get all of Vincent, whom Renata ran into when she went into the alternate dimension. So they're trying to get him out of it and find out where she is. And it's just the culmination of this family searching for themselves through time. They're obviously a family with some supernatural abilities because they can control time and travel through time. But it's about this family searching for their matriarch, and and it's about basically the genesis of this family finding each other, and how even if they've forgotten a lot of their past, because that's what that mirror dimension does, their love is still something that isn't undeniable. Because love is the greatest force in the universe. I said it. It's true.
I mean, I agree with that. I feel like everything internal, which is like, where my perspective falls because of my line of work, falls back to self-love, So I can totally get down with love is the answer, period.
Love is the answer to all my books, spoiler, but you'll have a fun ride reading through it, or I hope that's what you get from it. But yeah, I think the sense of belonging and love and our connection is what kind of unites all of us, all of the organisms, like, my dog, love has a need for love. Like, it's not something that's only human. I think Carl Sagan said this, but the sentience of humans is akin to the universe kind of looking at itself in a mirror. We're able to kind of marvel at the wonder of the universe because, we're not really sure if stars are conscious, so they don't know how gorgeous they are. But we get to say, man, this is amazing, and what a gift to be alive and get to really acknowledge that, if you've had the time,
Yeah, and I love that you explore too the mythos of mirrors, because there is throughout our history so much story around mirrors, around reflection.
Yes.
I mean, Narcissus is a super early one that I think most people are familiar with, where he looks at himself in a still pool and turns into the narcissus flower because he never leaves the pool. But even just like in folklore and mythos around magical beings, there is this dichotomy of both, like mirrors can create an amplification of power, or they can create a reflection into an alternate dimension but the view is warped because the mirror changes how we see things. And so I love that you've explored that. I think that's a really great piece to include in a story.
Yeah, and mirror work in and of itself is really interesting. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but it's very powerful. It's a very powerful tool to change your mindset and your perspective. And I think that really influenced me because I've done mirror work, and I definitely look at myself every day in the mirror, give myself a smile. I'm like, you can do this, and I think it's important to, mirrors are just weird. But
yeah, I Louise Hay, I think, is probably the most famous person, or whose school of thought is teaching mirror work right now. But for anyone who doesn't know, mirror work is typically from a mindfulness background, looking at yourself in a mirror and giving yourself affirmative messages. So, or simply working with something that is challenging for you to hear, but that you need to hear more of, like, I love you, or you are lovable, or you are beautiful. These are all things that we often don't say to ourselves, right? This goes back to self-love.
Absolutely.
And when we can make eye contact with ourselves and say something like, I love you, you are beautiful, and really reach to that feeling tone that where it feels true, we can have, again, those miraculous experiences that we have some understanding of through psychology, and also there's still more to explore, because that means that it can be a little magical.
There's magic in there. There's some magic. I won't lie. I've been doing mirror work for years. I read Louise Hay in my 20s. It really helped me out. I still get goosebumps when I say nice things to myself. Oh, really, Tina? Thank you. Have fun with it. But I think too, in terms of breaking negative thought processes, or if you have something big like a novel that you're like, this will never be done, it's really important to, you are your biggest cheerleader. Your self-love is vital, but mirror work, it's great. And mirrors are still weird.
For sure. Yeah, actually, my goddaughter is 12, and no, she's 10. I keep saying she's 12. She's younger than that. I'm no good with ages, but she is just she's just started being uncomfortable with mirrors in a way that I can really relate to, because when I was prepubescent and going into my teen years, like, there were a lot of times where I couldn't have mirrors. And I think that goes into a reflection of where our psychology is at. Like, are we comfortable with looking at ourselves, and what feelings does that bring up into us? And also, how often are we looking into another dimension and not recognizing?
Right?
Yeah, is that really me?
Kind of like when you hear yourself recorded, you're like, that's how I sound. Because you really also, this is a weird science thing, you really don't know the sound of your own voice because you're hearing it in your head, echo. Your ears are picking it up. So whenever I hear a recording, I'm like, that's how I sound. Especially during these COVID times when we started doing a lot of Zooms, I'm like, that's what I look like when I talk to people. And I've been working in front of a mirror for like a decade doing hair. And I'm like, I must have just looked away.
Well, so we're coming up toward the end of our hour. Is there anything that you really want to revisit or emphasize, or something that you haven't shared yet that you want to make sure we get in here?
Yeah, I'd love for you guys to visit my website, tinacapricorn.com, sign up for Bella's newsletter. My Chihuahua is over here, but she writes all of my newsletters. Because for some reason, when I started doing them, felt really uncomfortable writing about myself. As an indie author, that's one thing that I struggle with, is still promoting myself and be like, would you like to buy my book or look into it? So I started with my dog writing my newsletters because I thought it was funny too. But really, it's me, because she doesn't have opposable thumbs. But she's very but they're always fun. And I also, on the newsletters, I promote other authors' work, because I got a lot of author friends and we all write great books, and I'd love to share their work with you too. And also, I'm on Instagram, and I'm pretty active on there, and I post weird pop science things about time dilation and snowball Earth. And I also post really cute pictures of Bella, the Chihuahua, and pictures of me just going through this author life. So I'd love to connect with you on there if you're at all interested. And I do live shows about twice a month on Instagram, where I either interview an author peer of mine, or I just started a show that I'm actually really excited about. It's What's Your Superpower? And it's where I just get other authors that are geeks like me, and we talk about different pop culture or things that have influenced our work. And Marvel's a big influence for me. I love Marvel. I love the storytelling. I love the mythology. And I've been reading comics since I was a kid too. Love of superpowers. And our next episode is going to be on Marvel What If. We're also going to talk about Dune one time. We're also going to talk about Witcher. Like, all of this, is fodder for other people making great stories. If you think about it, the line of stories down through the ages, we've all taken stuff from Gilgamesh and Beowulf and all that stuff. And so this is just a more contemporary look at that, which is a lot of fun. So, but yeah, come find me.
Yeah, very cool. I like to think about those stories that happened at the beginning of humanity as like the stories of humanity's childhood. And now I feel like we're moving into the young adulthood of our society. And what stories do we want to tell? And I think that works on both an individual and collective level. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this interview today and for participating in the Easton Book Festival. I'm super grateful to have spent this time with you. And thank you to everyone who has tuned in to watch us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Love chatting. Love you. And I'll see you all around.
Awesome. All right. Bye, everyone. Enjoy your day.